Here we go.
Who did it?
Wow.
Who figured it out? Hooray!
We found the magic button. Excellent.
Magic. It was written magic on it, and you just had to click.
It had like the big shining lights that said, click me, click me, click
Click
me.
me. I'm magic. Click me. I'm magic.
Thanks, James Cobb. All right. Okay, like with this small delay, I think we can start. We have our excellent guests today. We have Eric, Erin, and
Antonio.
Antonio Concalves. Yes, our guest star for today to talk about superheroes workshop. So,
Superheroes.
Eric, do you want to say a few news from Quarkus?
Yeah, we got some news. So I guess the first thing we need to plug is so those folks that are here in the U.S. or anybody that's overseas that's coming to the U.S. in April for DevNexus. We've got a ton of Quarkus-related talks there. I know I'm doing 2 talks. I'm doing one with Holly, who's not here today. So there's a couple talks there. I know Roberto Cortez is going to be there doing talks. Erin, she's like magic button here. Erin's going to be there talking about some stuff outside her normal comfort zone.
Oh yeah, way outside. I got no idea what I'm doing. It's gonna be awesome.
Yeah. So we got that, and I know Antonio is one of the organizers of DevOps France, so he's got that coming up. When is that?
And we do have 12, 13, 14th of April. Sorry, all the tickets are sold. But we will be having a 3-hour lab. The one that we already run in DevOps Belgium about Quarkus, Micronaut, and Spring Boot. And a little bit of Azure. So we took the workshop from Belgium upside down. We changed bits and pieces. And I'm hoping to update the workshop because it's going to be mid-April, to update the workshop so we can use Quarkus 3.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I'm on the fence for my talk because I'm between Quarkus and Camel. So I don't think I can go there to Quarkus 3 quite yet. I don't think they're totally ready. It's a lot of changes. So it's like, well, that talk is soon. Maybe I shouldn't rock that boat just yet.
Can I throw a plug for DevOps Greece, which is after DevOps France? And I know the folks there, they now have an upgraded event. It's the first one in this region. And I think it's like the first week of May. And we try to have a nice Quarkus presence with a Quarkus track and something like 6 to 8 talks on that particular track. So it's going to be fun as well. If you can't make it to France because all tickets are sold,
It's a great problem to have, though. That's great.
In May, yes. Yeah.
That's great.
Indeed.
And I think, Antonio, you mentioned something that you've got a couple books that you're in the process of updating.
Oh, yes. I don't know if you remember, but a long time ago, I wrote 2 books, Understanding Quarkus and Practicing Quarkus. And I am in the process of updating them to Quarkus 3. So that's why I follow the evolution of Quarkus 3 quite closely. Alpha 4 just came out. And I have to say, I'm amazed that 95% of the code just went banged. My book has, I don't know, many hundred tests. My book covers everything from REST endpoints to Kubernetes to GraalVM and everything in the middle. And I'm really amazed to see that, except changing the Javax package to Jakarta package and a bit of XML here and there when needed, 95% of the tests just worked magically. And a couple of tests didn't work, but that's not because of Quarkus, but because of Rest Assure. Because of Rest Assure, when you tell Rest Assure I'm using a JSON-B binding, it still looks under javax dot something, and it fails miserably. So
another reason to switch to Jackson.
Yeah. Who uses JSON-B anymore?
The core profile that you should implement soon.
Yeah. That's an argument Emily and I have every time I see her.
It's part of the core profile, and I believe Quarkus will be not a reference implementation, we don't say that anymore, but a compatible implementation of core profile. No?
Metrics is the problem.
Oh, yeah, that's the micro profile, but the core profile should.
Oh, the core
should be
profile,
okay.
yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, I know metrics. There's a few issues with metrics on the micro profile. I won't say more about it.
That's about right. All right, let's talk about superheroes. Where are you? What are you doing?
All right,
You two
we'll
both
bring
have
the
some
slides
great
up.
stuff.
So let's just kind of walk through here. I do a quick, 2-minute thing, like for those who are like haven't been anywhere in the last year and don't know what it is that we're talking about. So kind of what it is, what it's doing. Those who I've been here before, I contribute to Quarkus. I'm not an engineer on Quarkus though. I've been doing open source for a long time. Like Antonio, I've written a book too. Except I don't make any money off of it. This is
like me.
Free download, anybody who wants it, but looking at Quarkus from a Spring perspective. But really, it's been a year, hasn't it? I think it was last February is when we were on here talking about the superheroes, because if you go out and you say pet clinic, like everybody knows what you're talking about. So with Quarkus, we needed something that wasn't operating on animals, literally and figuratively, to showcase Quarkus, like from developers' perspective. So we needed something definitely more than Hello World, because you get most of our guides, although the guides are very, very good. Most of them are just tailored to Hello World, and they're kind of like the Rest Easy guide focuses on rest, and the testing guide focuses on testing, and the Panache guide focuses on Panache. So we needed something more holistic. But really, I think that one of the key things, at least for me in my mind, when we were building this, was it needed to be stupid simple to run and deploy, right? No, I need to edit these. We didn't need a wiki page, like edit this file, make this change, and edit this file, make this change before you can either run it locally or deploy to Kubernetes or whatever. So it needed to be like really stupid simple to run. And we made some decisions around that, like hosting all the apps in a single repo and whatnot, with kind of that needs to be really easy to run as kind of the higher one of the highest level requirements. But it needed to be fully documented. It needed CI/CD, because there's a lot of things that you can do with it, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, rather than, okay, yeah, the apps are great, but I can take these apps and I can showcase other things. I can show open telemetry. I can show how to do CI/CD. I can show how GitHub Actions work. I can show how do I build multi-arc images. There's a lot of things that you can learn and look at from here. So for those who don't know what it is, it's this pretty complicated architecture, actually. There's 5 different services, 4 Quarkus services, 1 node service. There's some Prometheus in there. There's some Kafka. There's Apicurio. There's Apache Avro. There's Postgres, MongoDB, jQuery. What else?
I'll have to show you my text-based adventure someday. This is about normal.
Normal?
Mono repos are great. Mono repos are great for this kind of thing, because you can make sure everything is functional, which, from a sharing with users perspective is super important.
Yep. So there's some gRPC. There's a whole bunch of stuff.
Oh, you have gRPC? I'm jealous. I never put that in.
Well, it's kind of behind the scenes, because all the open telemetry stuff runs behind gRPC, and I can see you're kind of like leaning up against the screen.
I know. That's me. That's me. I should make it a big screen. That's all on me. I'm still awake. I'm not awake. It's Monday, so.
Yeah, so I'm just going to kind of run through these real quick. So this is kind of like review the hero service. So what's kind of interesting is the hero and the villain service are essentially the same app. They have the same use case. They have the same data schema. They have the same REST endpoints. The only major difference is one is fully reactive and one is fully blocking.
Oh, okay.
So the hero uses like all the reactive drivers with Mutiny and all that stuff, whereas the villain service is completely just Panache with JDBC and whatnot.
I don't know. That's a real interesting message.
Why not?
Oh, blocking is evil.
Well, so what's interesting is like reactive programming is hard. Like people who are new to reactive programming don't quite understand how to form a pipeline, and just because the method is executed at a certain point in time doesn't mean that the contents of the method are executed at that same point in time. So kind of grokking that in your head can be challenging. So one thing I'm working with the performance engineering team is we want to benchmark this and get this up running in a lab environment, outside of just, my own laptop here, so that we can run performance tests and like really prove out, is reactive programming really worth it? And maybe that answer will change.
A little different. Yeah. And this would feel a little different than like Tech Empower, which is designed to be a benchmark. This feels like a little more like an app to do a benchmark against.
Yeah. And then who knows, once Loom comes into play, does Loom really have an effect like on the blocking code? Does it make it faster? Does it make it worse? We can kind of put some real numbers behind some of those answers. So that's kind of, on my list of what's coming. So
I actually really like the comparison. I think that's a wise move. I just I find it funny the way you chose which which to assign it to.
I don't think it was like it wasn't like we sat down and said, should the heroes be reactive? Honestly, I don't even know how we decided. Maybe it was because the workshops. So Antonio, how did this come to be?
Yeah, well, it's quite a long story. This superhero, it's 3.5 years long story. Everything started when Quarkus just came out, and there was this conference that I organized called Vox Microservices in Paris. And well, due to COVID, we stopped. But this conference had one-day workshops. So it wasn't 3 hours lab or something like that. It was really long workshops from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And I thought, let's do a workshop on Quarkus. It was not even Quarkus 1, or maybe it was the very first release of Quarkus. There was not even dev services at the time. And so I contacted Emmanuel Bernard and Clément Escoffier. And I said, hey, guys, I have this fantastic idea. Let's do a one-day workshop on Quarkus. And Clément said, yeah, beautiful idea. And Emmanuel said, yeah, it's amazing, but I will not work on it, but it's amazing.
I'm not working on it, but I'll put my name at the first name on it,
right? Yeah, let's put my first name.
Yeah, that's Emmanuel. Yeah, all right.
And what I did, because all my books, I wrote my very first Java EE 5 book about 15 years ago. And it wasn't about pets. It was about books and CDs. So there's this vintage store that sells vintage stuff like CDs, books, and tapes and stuff like that. So I turned back to Emmanuel and Clément and said, let's do a one-day workshop, and we'll build a microservice app to sell vintage stuff, books and CDs and tapes. And Emmanuel said, yeah, whatever. And Clément said, that's really boring. Let's do something different. So it's actually Clément who had this idea of, yeah, let's do microservices. Let's do a one-day workshop. Everything is great, but let's not do it books and CDs. Let's do it with superheroes and supervillains. And that's how we created this workshop. That was 3.5 years ago. And we updated it for a few years. I still updated last October or last November. So the workshop is still there. There's this huge README, telling you all that you have to do. Well, that's exactly what you're showing. So the workshop is still there, and it's really do this, do this, do this, and do that, starting from blank. And that was it. And one day, Eric had this idea of taking the idea of the workshop, these superheroes and supervillains, and created a sample. And today, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, but the initial workshop is still for initial people, So yeah, there are microservices. Yeah, they talk to each other with HTTP and Kafka, but they are pretty basic compared to what Eric has done. Eric has done plenty of new things. He was talking about Avro, Apicurio, and so on, that we haven't put back to the workshop. So if you don't know anything about Quarkus, maybe start with the workshop. It's a nice step-by-step guide to follow. And if you are a more advanced user, or once you finish the workshop, look at the sample. You will find the same use cases, except that technically it's richer and more complex.
Yeah, and as we've been adding, features that the superhero sample is meant to be like more real world, like a lot of real world features, like circuit breaking and fallbacks and Kubernetes and all this other stuff. And yeah, we kind of you bring some stuff back, but the focus, it's kind of a different audience. Like the workshop is meant to be a workshop that you kind of build hands-on, doesn't adhere to a lot of like, all the classes are in one package kind of thing. It's things you would see in a workshop versus like a real life application.
Yeah, and
I
just
think
to reiterate, it's a full day workshop, right? And it's not like 3 hours. It's a full day and a bit more, but yeah. So it's a very, very interesting one, though.
Yeah. So that was kind of where it was born. So if we go back to what,
Yeah,
so
I'm
what's
a big
new?
fan of that. I'm a big fan of that concept because I found also that if you do a workshop or an example that's based on any kind of business thing, selling things, people are anchored to their business jobs. So it's like they're learning part. They can't learn because they're stuck. They like constantly compare with their existing environment, and they can't get into this, let me just learn and then go, which is why in 2016 we created a text-based adventure for microservices, because it's like, we're just going to do nonsense. You make whatever room you want, and people did that. They added services to our system. So conceptually, I'm a big fan of silly concepts like let's do heroes and supervillains. It gets people out of their comfort zone.
And as you say, it's pretty extensible because one person once told me, "Oh, you have a microservice to give you superheroes and another one to do supervillains, and they fight. And what about creating a new microservice that brings you a planet, so they can fight on a planet?" And you go, "Wow, yeah, that's cool, you know." Plus,
Or different microservices that do like different heroes from like DC Comics versus Marvel. Like you have different databases of where you're getting your things from, so you could extend it. That I know that's something Clement wanted to do too, but we kind of kept it a little simpler than that.
But that's where people get to do their thing and explore with whatever concept they find fascinating, and they can do it within a context where they're free to be a little more creative, which I always found is great for learning.
And as you say, Erin, if one day there is a startup in this planet that makes heaps of millions based on a game where superheroes and supervillains fight, first of all, we will be pissed off and sad not to have created this startup. But then, it will give a few tips of the planet we are living in anyway.
Yeah. So what is new? So when we first delivered this last year, it was the parity between the workshop and the sample was pretty close. Like we made a few changes kind of on purpose, like with the REST endpoints and whatnot. But for the most part, feature wise, it was pretty close. But since then, it's kind of diverged. I know there's a ton of text on this slide, so I'm gonna just kind of hit them quickly, and I'm gonna demo a lot of this stuff and show it in code. But I think that the biggest one is like keeping crap up to date. Like that's like anybody who creates content and does demos and whatnot, like we call it babysitting in my team. It's like the more you create, the more you have to babysit and keep up to date and make sure it still works as new versions. So for me, any people who know me, like I'm all about push button, and I want the easy button, and I don't want to have to touch anything with my hands. So this process is completely and fully automated through, if you don't know what GitHub Dependabot is, so between Dependabot and automated pull requests and the entire test suite that sits behind the superheroes, it pretty much keeps itself up to date. Plus, it runs and builds against Quarkus main every day. And if something in Quarkus main breaks, we know. And Demetrius or Georgios or somebody gets like an email from an issue that gets opened up through the automation. So it even opens on, if you're not familiar with status.quarkus.io, those who don't know what this is kind of like the status of everything that's going on, from a build perspective, and the superheroes are on here somewhere. Yeah, right here. And so if you're ever interested in following, like when has it broken and when has it gotten fixed, there's a whole issue that tracks this. And so the automation will automatically reopen this issue if the nightly build fails. And this issue is on Quarkus itself, not on the superheroes. So there was an issue where last week, with the branch of Quarkus 3 to main, there was some logic put in there to see, hey, is the ecosystem app running on 2 or 3? And if so, to pull either the main branch or the tag branch. But it assumed that Palm XML was at the root of the repo, which for a repo that has multiple projects didn't work. So I had to do a pull request back to that to fix the automation, but you can kind of start to see that, over time it'll break something, somebody will have to fix main, and then this will get fixed and cleaned up. So we know it's kind of a check against Quarkus itself. Did somebody in Quarkus check something in that broke it? So that's kind of one cool thing. Oh, you talked about the Avro, and I was having a hard time remembering if the Avro integration was done when we originally released it, because it was like February of last year. I kind of put these in chronological order as as they were introduced. So the most recent things are down the bottom. I guess that maybe I should have done it the other way, but the next thing was Quarkus Qute. So if you're not familiar with Qute, the templating engine that sits inside Quarkus. So if I run, I'm going to go to my IDE. I'm going to actually just run it with, I'm just going to start it with Docker Compose, the entire system. So this is kind of one of the things that it needed to be like really stupid simple to start up. So I can just Docker Compose a single command. I don't want it to go down. I want it to go up.
Just to give another a bit more context, the very first versions of the workshop were using Angular. So the UI was Angular based and, invoking microservices.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually doing the same thing now, which I'll just plug my DevNexus thing for a second. I've got a Svelte UI going over, I don't have Qute templates in it, although I love Qute. I have another app that uses Qute, but I've got a Svelte UI that uses Quinoa now to run the whole front end and build it within my app, within my Quarkus app build. It's building my front end, which is sweet. I like it.
We actually did talk about Quinoa. We did talk about introducing Quinoa to the
it's nice.
Yep.
It's nice.
Yeah, there's a whole discussion in the issue tracker about whether to do it or to not or whatnot, and we ended up deciding not to do it.
Yeah, because we are all back-end developers, and we went.
I'm trying. So for DevNexus, this app that I'm writing is front end and back end, and my brain between TypeScript and Java is screwed because the names go in different orders. So I'm typing it wrong every line. I'm all backspaces. It's like when you're used to VI and you go into an IDE and you put :W2 everywhere. It's terrible.
Yeah. So you can see what I did. I just did a Docker Compose up and it started the whole system, but there's this cute little watch script that you can run too. So when you start Docker Compose, separate terminal, you can just run this script and it'll watch all the services and it'll come back just like it did here and say, yay, everything is up and running.
Yeah, you need some emojis on that, like popcorn.
Yeah, my UI. So like, I am not a UI guy at all. So feel free. Pull requests are always open. It's an open source project.
Sprinkle emojis everywhere and it makes everybody happy.
I love popcorn. Good idea.
So you can see, the user interface is up. I've got some powers and I can, fight. And then over here on the left, it updates on the fly in real time. So so behind that complicated architecture, this is what you get, right? But
this is written with Qute now? You wrote
no, this is not Qute. Oh. I was just showing the app.
Okay.
But if I go to localhost, let's see if I go to 8083. So this is the fight server. So I was so proud of myself when I built this because I am totally not a UI guy. So this uses all the pattern fly widgets, so I can like expand and collapse, and I can search. There's like a search bar. So if I want to search for Chewbacca, I can click the button and it filters based on that. I was like super proud of myself when I built this because like I know how to spell JavaScript. Like I still need a spell checker for spelling JavaScript.
It's the pinnacle of your user interface development.
Yeah. Like if you see any of my user interfaces, they look like from the 90s, like with a white background and black text, and that's about as pretty as it gets. Like raw.
And the table, the TR, and the TD. I love those.
Yep.
Tables still have their purpose. Tables are not evil.
Yeah. So both the heroes and the villains. So if I go over here and I go to 8084, so it's the same interface except this is one is heroes, one is villains. But behind the scenes, because the heroes villains is reactive and the villains is completely blocking, it shows how you do Qute templates within each context. So if I open the code for these, the actual template itself is pretty identical, but you just look. It's just an HTML file with some CSS and some jQuery stuff to make the widgets and stuff work. But the code which actually generates it, one of the cool things with Qute, and I came from Spring MVC, where I have a free marker background, so that's where, like in my previous jobs, we were doing server-side rendering using free marker to generate HTML. And you have no idea how many times like I'd load my app and I'd bring my page up and just crap didn't work because you either had a typo in your variable name or you were using camel case in your variable names on the server side, but not in the template. Qt catches all of that because it does compile side type checking and whatnot. So if I were to change the name of like my variable in here in the template, the list of villains, if I were to take the S off of here, it would actually break at compile time because it does compile time checking between the template and the resource, which is invoking the resource. And so it's different, because this is blocking versus if I go to the non-blocking side, it's returning unis of HTML. So that's kind of one cool thing. And I learned how to do Qt and how to do some JavaScript and some jQuery stuff. So like I said, I was super proud of myself when that worked because totally not my area of expertise.
But the main UI is still Angular, the one with
the main UI is still Angular, yeah.
Okay.
Although I keep having a thought, should we rewrite it in like React or something? But another question for another day.
Yeah. Eric, another idea, maybe we could add a couple of scripts to, let's say, load test the two services and see, are there any different, like faster or slower, something like that.
Yeah, so we have, and that's on the list to talk about, we have some JMeter stuff in here, but it's not for heroes and villains, it's for the fight. So if you go like up one level, it will load test the fight service and return it. I'll show that in a little bit. The next thing that we decided to do the first incarnation of this, where'd my architecture diagram go? So if I go back to the main repo here, so the main architecture diagram. So at first pass, everything was Postgres. And so somebody had the idea, well, maybe we should do different databases. So because if it's a microservices environment, different apps can kind of choose their own databases. And so we decided with the fight service, we moved it from Postgres to Mongo, which was interesting because Quarkus can preload data into the database, which we do with Postgres, but Mongo, the Panache extension, doesn't do that. So we actually have to bring in Liquibase in order to like pre-create the schema and preload data into the document store and whatnot. So by bringing Mongo in, we also brought in Liquibase integration into the fight service as well. So it's pretty. There's actually not a whole lot you have to do other than. Go back to the fight service.
Yeah, I've never had to use Liquibase.
Yeah, I've never.
Really I found when we wrote our text-based adventure game a million years ago, we had we used Cloudant, which was CouchDB, instead of Mongo, and that was a real interesting exercise too, because Couch is way more focused on MapReduce for everything. So like, the way you do queries and stuff is very, very different. Just, for people looking at the different databases with the microservices key and why you would choose different ones, like there are real good reasons why you might pick one NoSQL DB versus a different one versus the relational stuff. The behaviors are very different.
Yeah.
Or can be.
Yeah, and in reality, would we have chosen Mongo for like NoSQL for this type of thing? Maybe, maybe not. But we didn't really have that conversation. It was more because it's part sample. It's meant to kind of show how you would do it, so that we just figured, whether it's the right thing to do or not based on the use case, that almost didn't really matter. It was, we just wanted to show how to do it. And
it's also nice to show Panache. And when you use a Panache, either for SQL relational database or Mongo, it's quite, the code is pretty much the same, so that's nice.
Yeah, the only thing I really had to change was what class it extended when I brought in the Panache Mongo. And it's fully reactive, so the fight service is reactive.
Yeah, I've thought about rewriting, it's on my list, right, to take my old game, which still runs, and bring it over to Quarkus because it's over on Liberty with Cloudant. And that's a case where I don't know that I'd be able to use Panache consistently, right? Like I have some CRUD stuff where I want to use Panache because Panache is amazing and I enjoy it a lot. It simplifies things drastically. But the reason I picked Couch is because of specific features of Couch, and those won't show up in a generic Panache. Do you know what I mean? So it's there's like a trade-off here, I feel, when you're looking at a document data store versus a relational data store, where I don't know that I would use Panache with Mongo. Although another thing you guys could think about is talking to Justin about Morphia, which does some relational mappings for Panache and Mongo.
Interesting.
It's got some other superpowers from a superhero perspective, so you might ask him about that.
Never heard of that.
Yeah. All right, cool. So that's what we did with Mongo there. So let's go back to our list here.
Sorry, I'm adding all kinds of commentary in the middle.
No,
And
you're
it's
good.
funny because I'm really excited about the bottom and I'm preventing you from getting there.
Keeping the best for last, right?
Oh man,
So-
it's so exciting. I'm so excited.
So the next thing we did was this. So this Kafka campaign. I don't know how many people are familiar with what this is. So when you're the typical challenge of I'm writing tests and my app does something and interacts with like some kind of asynchronous thing, whether in this case it's Kafka, like a message broker. So, if we've got two apps, one's a producer, one's a consumer, and then they kind of have Kafka in the middle there. So on the producing app, the user does something which triggers some behavior, which then puts a message. So how do you test that message arrived and actually looks the way it's supposed to? And then on the flip side, your test needs to drop a message on a broker, and then your app needs to do something with it. So how do you do that in your tests? So the awesome folks in Quarkus built this, and I actually don't think it's part of Quarkus. I think it's part of the SmallRye. Where is it here? Kafka Companion. I know it's kind of been rolled into Quarkus a little bit to make it easy to use, but it's actually part of the reactive messaging component, this Kafka Companion thing. So the way it works, so I'm in the fight service. So in the fight service, the user interface does an HTTP posts a JSON payload. The app figures out who the winner is and responds back with, hey, here's your winner, but it also drops that fight result on a Kafka topic for somebody else to do something with. So in that case here, I can set up a consumer because the app is going to drop the message. So my test needs to be a consumer for that message, right? So the companion makes it really, really easy. I can just set up a consumer to look at that topic, basically rewinding back to the beginning because I'm only ever going to put one message on it, and then wait for messages to arrive.
Oh, nice.
Then I can do my test. So like I can do my post using rest assured. I can assert the result. And then I can make a request now back to the fights endpoint to make sure that I got one more than what was there before. But then I can here's the kind of the magic sauce here is now I can say to the broker on my companion is, hey, now wait and block until I get that message. And I want to get the first message because I'm only assuming that there's one. Wait for that first message. And then I can just use assert J to assert. So like people I used to see like time unit wait, 2 seconds, people trying to do like time-based waiting in their tests and whatnot. So this like eliminates the need to do any of that kind of stuff. So it makes it like really, really easy. On the flip side, I can do it where my test needs to start by posting a message on the broker, and then the app does something, and then I assert the results of what the app did. So in this case here, I have my companion. I can just tell it, hey, I'm going to produce the fight. And I've already got kind of a list of things that I want to go. And I can just say, hey, from all of these records, produce the record and dump these on the topic. And then I can use a waitility utility. If you've ever seen that, but it's another open source thing. Or I can say, hey, because nothing happens immediately. Like just because I put those messages, and this is an integration test. So this is like a real Kafka broker. It's not like an in-memory channel or anything like this. So there's like a real dev services that started a Kafka broker that's external to my app. So now I can say, hey, wait at most 5 minutes, but until some criteria happens, right? And in this case, this is a WebSocket protocol, so I'm waiting for the WebSocket to publish the messages back to the socket. So I can say, hey, wait until the 2 different WebSockets that I'm watching here publish the right amount of messages to the channel, and then continue with the test. And then do some validations and stuff.
And Eric is talking about Kafka. He was talking about Mongo. He was talking about Postgre. For those of you who don't know dev services on Quarkus, You know, I'm not talking about frameworks here, but I've recently I went back to a legacy framework, and that's the feature that I was missing. And if you don't know what dev services is, check it out. Basically, you don't have to do much. You just have to put in your POM XML. This app is using Kafka. This app is using Postgre, and that's it. You don't have to configure anything. And in test and development environment, Quarkus will use test container, pull the Docker image of Kafka, Postgre, Mongo, start it, configure it with default users, default password, default everything, changing ports and so on, and make it work. And this is when you taste that, you can't go back to the old frameworks that even for testing, you have to remember the URL, the user, the main password, and so on and so forth. So dev services for me is the killing feature, one of them, but is the killing feature of Quarkus. So if you don't know what it is, just give it a try with a little hello world, and then go back to your old framework and see how painful it is.
So as you're talking, I'm doing on the command. So I stopped the Docker Compose and I'm starting all the apps individually. So you can start to see that like the villains started up a Postgres, Heroes started up a Postgres, Fights is starting up Kafka, it's starting up an Apicurio registry, it's starting up a Mongo database. When I come over here to the, now what's interesting with the, oops, I don't need that whole thing. With some of these dev services, it gets, like with a Kafka broker, for example, where they're both apps need Kafka, they actually share the broker with each other. So like where the, oops, what did I do here?
2 dashes, you just missed one.
2 dashes, yeah. So it'll actually, the first one, so in this case, I started Fights first. It started Kafka broker, Apicurio, Mongo. Now when I start the event statistics service, it won't start a Kafka or an Apicurio instance because it sees that there's already one running, and it will automatically see it and bind to it, which is cool.
Do they fight with, well, I guess it depends on how your tests run. Do they fight with data stores or do they do separate ones?
No, they just on data stores. So like in Postgres, for example, each one will start its own Postgres.
Yeah. Okay.
You can tell it if you want it to share. There's a configuration that you can tell
in dev mode. Like in dev mode, you can say, please share them. I think, rather than in test mode where you want them to be reliably isolated. I love dev services, and it works. What I love about it is it works even if you're working on CLI apps that are one and done. So it doesn't just work for the server side. Yeah, my last couple of talks, as Eric knows, have all been ridiculous apps that run in CLI.
And I can tell you in the last couple of talks, Quarkus people demonstrated dev services. I could see in the audience, they were baffled, like, where's the configuration? Like,
it just
what happened there? Like, how does it work?
Which configuration?
It's almost magic. I mean, and very slick. I mean, it just works out of the box.
Just works. So now I've got all them running, and now that I have my new laptop, the smoke isn't coming out, and it's not like taking off my desk and blowing up into outer space. I can actually run all this stuff. All right, so that's that. Just looking at time here. We got plenty of time. So another cool thing that we started to do was, as I got my new Mac, kind of a great segue, and I wasn't even thinking about it. Great segue. Was the ability to build multi-arch images. So as part of the automation that we have in place, if I come back to the main repo here.
I haven't messed with multi-arch yet. Really? That's amazing.
So we have, as part of the CI/CD process, so anytime you do a pull request or commit back to main, there's this whole suite of automation that runs. The first one is just this, the basic build. So it does it in a matrix. So it does... So like this was the last one when it updated from 2.16.2 to 2.16.3. There's 2 jobs. One's a matrix job. So we build against Java 11 and 17.
Right.
And then we also build native. So one of the changes, originally we were building, because GraalVM has both a Java 11 and a Java 17 backed version, we stopped separating and just building a single native version, which is based on the GraalVM 17.
Yeah, because they're moving up, right?
Yeah. So we build all 4 apps in 11, all 4 apps in 17, and then we build all 4 apps in native, and it runs all the test suite, both unit and integration tests. So that happens on every pull request and every single commit. And then on a commit, once that happens, there's another set of automation that runs, and it looks kind of complicated. But essentially, we build all the JVM, so those same flavors. We build JVM images for 11 and 17, but both for AMD 64 and ARM.
Yeah. Do you have, when you do releases, I'm just curious. I don't know if you
don't really do releases. There's really no such thing as a release.
Because I have a couple projects where I'm doing releases, right? Where it's just like, if you wanted to just download all the working stuff, here's the final pieces. So I didn't know if you'd use JReleaser, because JReleaser does a lot of, it can do multi-arch releases. But I found, because of GitHub Action M1 stuff, like I've got to build the GitHub Action M1 things on my laptop.
Yeah, so that's kind of the interesting. So we don't do releases, so we're not really ever releasing anything. But I don't have ARM-based GitHub Action runners, so I'm still using all Ubuntu runners, and I'm using the Docker X, the build.
I'm gonna have to copy from you. Amazing.
So it uses the Docker has this plugin called BuildX that can produce multi-arc images using emulation, which the ARM emulation is slow. So like it'll build the AMD image in like 2 minutes, and it might take 15 to build the ARM one.
Yeah.
Depending on the app. It's definitely a whole lot slower, but it does work. And a little plug for myself, the Quarkus Docker extension, I actually built all that into the Docker extension.
Nice.
The BuildX integration.
Now I'm going to have to copy from you. Yay.
Yeah. So if you actually look at what the job does, is it sets up Docker BuildX, and then it's going to use the builder here. So it says, it tells it the Docker builder Docker extension to use the platform, but you have to do the setup stuff first. You have to set up BuildX on the runner.
Yeah. All right. That's fine. Because I have to, like, the fact that I can't do the release for my stupid CLIs, because they are stupid. That's been a limitation for me. So I will play with this. This is awesome.
Yep. And on the UI side, the non-Quarkus app, the node image, I'm just using the where is it here? The Docker.
Right, because you're putting the node one as a separate.
Yep. So where's the build? Here's the build job. So when I build it, I'm just actually using the Docker build push action directly from the GitHub Marketplace.
Right.
And I can
you don't have to release because you're pushing images. It's basically the same thing, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
But what I do, so because I'm building so many images, where is it here? There's like, if you look at how many images this thing builds, so 16 plus 8 is 24, so it's like 26 total images, and they're all built in parallel. I don't want to push a single image until I know all of them build successfully.
Yeah.
That's why there's I use another action, which it builds all the images and it kind of stores it off in temp storage. And then once all these jobs finish, it comes back and it pulls all those images out of temp storage, and then it pushes them all.
Right, which makes sense.
It's like a transaction.
Like a transaction, and then it has to do, because I'm not, when you use the Docker
BuildX forever.
Yeah. So when you use Docker BuildX, you can tell it to push in one step, which I don't want to do. So I have to manually create the multi-arc manifests, like that link. So when you say Docker run or Podman run or whatever you're using, you don't have to tell it what architecture. It figures it out. So I have to actually create that manually. So if you look on Quay, it's a little bigger here. It's like for any of these images, so like there's a latest, and then it's got the, it has the top level manifest. So when you just pull latest, it'll figure out based on what architecture you're requesting, which one, and it'll pull the right one.
Eric, I think I have an idea for our next talk. Many years ago, like 4 or 5 years ago, Roberto and I did a few talks on microprofile, and we both have a nice box with 12 Raspberry Pis and a switcher and everything. I haven't used it for a few years now, but that would be fantastic to deploy the superhero on those 12 Raspberry Pis. And the nice thing was on stage, we would plug and unplug cables from one Pi to another one, and we will see the failover and the metrics and so on. So maybe next year, a talk
Yeah,
on
that sounds like a good talk. Just have to lug all the
super-
hardware through customs, right?
superheroes on Raspberry Pis.
Well, then you can talk to Holly, and she can tell you how you sew them into a ball so you can throw them around the room. We did that.
Stick them into our jackets, right? So we just like, boom, here's all the pies.
Yeah,
And I've got
all
a
of us can
backpack
have
with
it in a-
power on my back
Yeah,
under the
we
cape.
can- yeah, no, we can
Mobile
do
cluster.
totally.
A mobile
That's what
cluster.
we-
There we go. I'm on the edge. I'm living on the edge.
Yeah, we've done that. It's totally doable and it's super fun. And you can do crazy, dumb things like that. It's great.
All right, a couple other things. So we integrated everything, and I'm not going to demo this, but smaller stork. So both for when you're deploying on Kubernetes, there's service discovery. So it discovers, like the fight service will discover the heroes and villains using the underlying Kubernetes service discovery mechanism, and doing client. The apps have all the extensions in place, so you can switch the algorithm. Right now, it's just using like the stupid, because there's only ever one instance. Like when it deploys, there's only one instance of anything. But all the extensions are loaded, so you could reconfigure it to use a different algorithm for client-side load balancing if you wanted to play with it.
So this is like the trade-off between doing something in the client and having that code in the client versus somebody who has a service mesh deployed where that's done at the sidecar level, right?
Well, not really service mesh. So, like for example, here, if I go to if I go to the fight service, like to one of the
Well, that's
clients.
what I mean. Like for me, that's the trade-off. I don't know why I would use a client's. I don't know why I would put this stuff in my client if I'm in an environment that has a service mesh that's doing that kind of stuff.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. So I mean, there's nothing in here that's specific to that, other than if you were to look at the configuration for. Like the hero client just points to Stork hero service, and then it lets Stork figure out where that actually is. And for running it locally, it's just a static list of here it is. Like it's like kind of a layer of indirection that doesn't really buy you anything when you're running it locally.
And that's runtime config.
This is, I believe, that's a good question. I don't know.
Config.
I don't know.
Right, because that's my question. This is.
No, it is runtime config, because the app builds this way, but when it gets deployed to OpenShift or something. Let me find the descriptor here.
Yeah, because that would be my question. So as someone who's thought about
it's definitely runtime, because when I deploy it to Kubernetes, the config changes.
Yeah, you defer. Perfect. Because that has been my question for a long time. As someone who has been involved in this space forever, when ribbon was a thing, right? Mm-hmm. I always felt real strange having that built into my app, which Netflix at the time that was all pre-Kube basically. So, Netflix was like, this is a hard problem to solve. We're going to make the one library that will help everybody write it because it's a difficult problem. And then everybody includes the library in their app and they configure it in their app and everything's great. I always had a big problem with that because it does inject things into the app where the sidecar doesn't.
Yeah.
And the sidecar figures that out. But you're basically saying you could choose, like you could have the config there, but if it defers to Kubernetes, then the service mesh would be figuring that out if you're in an environment with service mesh. That's a good trade-off for me.
So essentially the app is just looking at the Kubernetes service and say, okay, where do I go?
Right. And I'm assuming
this is a conversation I've been having internally with some people around Dapper. And I am totally not a fan of Dapper because you need to bake all these client libraries into your app to tell it about Dapper versus something like Qute, which just kind of sits around your app and your app doesn't really know about it. But that's a different
the sidecar
question. Day.
That's the sidecar question. But it's interesting. It would be interesting to know, like in OCP, for example, when you're deploying into OpenShift, how the OpenShift service mesh plays with this, because it should be fine. You're delegating to Kubernetes. That should feel like delegating to service mesh because you can't tell the difference. The app doesn't know the difference between them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. All right, so I want to get to the
more
good
minutes,
stuff.
by the way. Just a time check.
Jump to the bottom.
Yeah.
Jump to the bottom. Jump to the bottom.
Yeah. I want to do one thing first. So one thing first. I've got a an OpenShift cluster here. It's actually an ARO cluster for Antonio. It's running on Azure. So I'm going to deploy real fast. I thought I did it already, but apparently I didn't. I'm going to OC applied. Let's make sure I'm in the project. OC project. Okay. OC apply -F. I'm just going to boom deploy the app. Everything will start up. And then I'm going to OC apply the monitoring stack as well. The monitoring stack is Prometheus, maybe Grafana in the future, the OpenTelemetry collector, and Jaeger is the monitoring stack. So once that deploys, so like we said, stupid simple to deploy, you get this really cool diagram, which like crap is all over the place. Don't mind. This does really bother me under the covers, but I don't really have time to fix it and make it look pretty. Yeah. So once everything turns green, just wait a second.
Yeah, just a sad note. Last year with Eric, we did a few talks with a superhero on Azure Container Apps. So Arrow is the Azure support for OpenShift, and there's AKS for Kubernetes on Azure, but there's also Azure Container Apps, and that's what we did last year.
I got this right here. That's on my bullet to talk about. Yeah. If we get there, we might cut you for time, but
we'll come back. Let's talk about the new thing.
Yeah. So there's that, and then if I come, I've got the Jaeger. He's in here somewhere. Here he is, Jaeger. So I can select the fight service, make this a little bigger, and I can select, get the random fighters. I see all the traces, and I see all the traces between all the apps. And similarly,
I
it
haven't
does
added
work.
Traces to mine, so that's pretty nice.
Yep, but it also works over the messaging. So like when I post the message to Kafka, the trace follows over Kafka. So you can see this event posted it, and then this service picked it up. It looks like it was huge because like you can't really see my hands, but it's like really long here. But the total time is this was actually the first one. The second one, where's it here? Yeah, it's pretty quick on across. So yeah, so that's OpenTelemetry. And that just kind of worked out of the box. We'll come back to JMeter if we have time. Antonio mentioned container apps. So like I did stand it up. So you can see in Azure Container Apps, I have a resource group, and I've got the entire system running in Azure. And it's very easy to stand up. If I go into the scripts directory, there's this deploy to container app script, and it can take some parameters like what resource group, what region, whether you want to stand up a container registry and all this kind of stuff. You want to change the Postgres SKU. But you basically run this, and a couple minutes later, boom, it's all up and running in container apps for you. But it's using managed Postgres from Azure. It's using the Azure Event Hub for the Kafka. What else is it using?
MongoDB.
Yeah, the MongoDB from Cosmos. So it ties into all the Azure services.
And if you don't know Azure Container Apps, there's the equivalent in AWS and GCP, but basically it's a managed Kubernetes cluster. So under the hood is Kubernetes, but you can't touch it. You can't do anything with it. You just deploy containers, and everything is scaled up and down with KEDA, as was mentioned by Eric.
So this is the last part here. Like we were racing to the end. So contract. So this kind of dovetails off of Holly's talk last week, where we talked about contract testing and Pact contract testing, and specifically. So I don't want to like redo her whole hour. So if you don't know what contract testing is, go back to last week's episode and kind of rewatch it a little bit. But essentially, we've taken all that and we've built that into the superheroes. And one of the things Holly had mentioned was, okay, you've got this, you got this consumer and you got these producers. How do you share that contract between the producers and the consumers? And the poor man's solution is the consumer generates the contract, and then you copy it into the producer's repo, and which is what we are doing here essentially. So in the hero repo under source test resources, that the contract is here because we want to enable it in CI. You've got all these constraints, but it would be super simple and really dumb, or really easy, not dumb, to change this. So instead of having this annotation that looks in a particular folder for the contract, so you could say, hey, go to this broker. We kind of mentioned the broker last week, like the Pact broker. But what if you could pull the contracts from the broker? So I've got a broker and I'm using their open source, which tab is it here? All the way down the end. So right now there's no contracts there. If I want to publish some contracts, so I'm going to go.
Yeah, Pact flow is pretty amazing. The hard part when people are getting used to Pact that I found, you can correct me, is so Pact is a good how I test the relationship between two services, because we want to test in isolation but prevent against drift is basically what you're doing. You want to make sure every microservice is free to evolve independently. That's the key for a microservices, a functional microservice environment. You don't want to do unified deploy outside of workshops, right? You don't want to, the whole point of doing that is to enable your different services to evolve at different rates, and then you want to protect against drift. So the conceptual problem I've solved, or I've found, is exactly what you're showing here. It's like the order of operations. Do you publish the contract first, and then the consumers work against the contract, right? And then the next
the consumer creates the consumer creates the contract.
I always okay. So in my head, you have an API. That's like the foundation of everything. You don't have anything if you don't have an API. So like the producer has to create something, define an initial API, and then yes, contract-wise, the consumer is using the API and recording their
testing. It's backwards. So how does the provider know what to build unless there's a consumer asking for it?
It is a bit of chicken and an egg, because you have to have the idea coming from somewhere.
Well, so you don't. So with consumer testing, so this is the fight service, for example. And so when the fight service talks to the hero service, pretend the hero service doesn't even exist, right? I can build in my contract. I can say my contract between the heroes and the fights should have a contract that says when I call the hello endpoint, I get the string back that has some text. I don't really care what the text is, or I could care what the text is. Like that's the beauty of Pact.
Right.
But in this case, I don't care anything.
This is where we have like coordinated, that initial domain-driven design, universal language. What are the roles involved in our system? What kinds of activities they have? Because if you have, let's say, a bigger scenario, if you have several services that all need to call one service, they can't all independently decide what that service is, at least not at first. Because then you have a mess. You have 5 different order services.
Right, but
maybe you only need one.
It would still be the consumers driving what needs to be done, but there need to be some kind of conversation as, hey, let's figure out what the right domain is.
That's right.
And then we can all kind of adjust. But
there is like an origin point.
Yeah,
when you're defining that language.
Talk to each other. It forces the teams to talk to each other.
Exactly.
So
that's what I'm trying to get. There is like an origin place.
So like what's interesting is the fights in the heroes, not fight, the villains in the hero service. Like you figure whenever you build a CRUD service, you build all the operations, right? Create, read, update, delete. None of those other operations are ever used by any other service here. So I built all those, because it's a demo app and it's for show and you should do it anyway. But in reality, nobody's asking for them. So why did you spend the time to build them? And all the tests that go with them and the integration testing and keeping them up to date. Like, why would you do that if nobody cares about them?
Right.
So in this case, there's only 3 endpoints. So I can say, but here's what's kind of cool is I can say, I want a random hero, but I expect that the provider is in a state where they don't have any data. Whatever that means to the provider, me as a consumer, I don't really know, but there's a state that I need to handle. What if I ask for a random hero and they don't have one to give me?
Right.
Pretty common.
Which is a failure state that you should cover, for sure.
Well, you could argue if it's failure or just a not the primary use case, but that's up for debate. But
well, what I would say from a microservices standpoint, right? This is the graceful failure part, right? If you need data, but there's data's not there, you have to still function.
Yep.
You can't bring the whole world down.
Yep. So here I can define it's the same endpoint, but I have 2 different results based on the state that the provider is in at that point in time. And so when I run the consumer tests on the fight service, I'm just going to run these because I don't want to run the whole test suite. I'm just going to run these, but I also put in a flag where it's going to publish the contract at the end as well.
Yep. And this is where you start establishing that round trip to protect against drift. I'm super excited about this. If I could say that 12 more times. This is a workflow that's hugely important if you really want to get to decoupled development. Like this is the.
So now if I come back to the broker, you notice there's 2 contracts now, and this one I was playing with, so I've already deleted it, but it seems to remember that I had one of the same version because I didn't change versions. But in any event, if I come into the heroes and I say I can view the contract, so here's the consumer details, but there's no provider details because no provider has done anything with this contract yet. But you can see there's 3 interactions, a hello request, and this is kind of what the request should look like. And then there's a request for a random hero where the body, and you can get one of the questions that Holly talked about was, I'm doing, open API. How is this different? Well, with open API, you're only talking about the structure. With Pact, I can get okay, the structure is good, but if this field has this value, then this other field should have a value that looks like this.
Right. This starts documenting the consumer's important interaction patterns, which is key.
Yep. And at the consumer side, so when I ran these tests, Pact actually created this contract, but it actually stood up a mock server behind the scenes.
Yes.
And so now it actually ran a bunch of tests that I also run against WireMock because I have a shared base class. So I have WireMock, which is just testing all my REST endpoints because I have more REST endpoints than what I'm actually talking on the server here, like my client REST endpoints. So I stubbed it out as a subclass just using object-oriented, inheritance and all that kind of stuff. So I'm actually running real tests, both against WireMock and against Pact for the same contract in the same use case. You might say that that's overkill, and maybe it is, but I thought it was a cool thing to show. Because I like tests, I like to write lots of tests. But what's cool now is now on the server side, if I come over to the villains, which one am I talking about over here? Talking about, this was the heroes. So if I go to the heroes service, and if I got Quarkus up in dev mode, if I turn on continuous testing now, the fight service,
which is amazing.
Yep. So the heroes service is configured now where I can say, and I actually have 2 different hats. I have a hat that has a C and a hat that has a P. I don't have it here, but I have it upstairs for when I do this talk at DevOps or at DevNexus, because people get confused because I'm on the same laptop and I'm the same person. Am I working on the consumer or producer? So I have a black P hat and a red C hat that I.
That's right. That's right.
Back and forth. But you can see now that all the tests ran, everything is good. But so now it's pulling the contracts from the broker, and any contract which tags this provider. So if there's multiple consumers that both use the provider, it'll find all those contracts on the broker. And if I come back to the broker now and I refresh, you can actually see it's been verified by the provider, so that everything is green.
Right, and so that's the producer still running independently. So the producer didn't have to have the consumer available. Nope. So decoupled, they can test in isolation. If the producer changes something that breaks the consumer expectation, they find out right away.
Yep. And
before they break anybody.
This could be a little bit more, I could actually make a change in the consumer and push a new contract, and then the provider, because just as dev services is running, it would just in the background just automatically start failing. And I didn't do anything. I didn't touch any of the code of the provider, but now the tests just start failing.
But that means that's the prompt. The 2 teams need to talk again, even though, but as long as they don't break each other, they're free to deliver, deploy, update, evolve, all of those things that you're supposed to do to get the benefit of microservice. The whole reason you break stuff into a billion pieces is just not for fun. It's to allow people to evolve at different rates, depending on what they're doing. And this is what allows them to know where their interactions are and make sure they don't break each other.
Yep.
Super important.
We started with a magic button and we finished with a magic contract.
Yeah. We're out of time, aren't we?
We need to wrap up. What do you have?
Yeah, I got one cool thing, but I'm not going to be able to show it. But I'm not going to be able to demo it. But
this was a cool thing.
Oh, actually, I got time to do it. It's actually quite easy. So I'm going to do. I'm going to do it. People can stay on or leave. It's up to them. So
You're
I'm
going to
going to
talk
come
about
here.
remote dev?
So I'm going to use JCube Remote Dev. So if you know what JCube is, JCube has this new very cool thing called Remote Dev that they just add. So it's different than Quarkus Remote Dev, because Quarkus Remote Dev, like if I've got my system running somewhere, I can run Remote Dev and it basically sends incremental updates back to the app that's running. But what JCube Remote Dev does is it actually is almost like I take my laptop and I put it in the cluster. So requests from the cluster come down to my laptop, run through like one app that's running in dev mode with continuous testing turned on, but then like the Kafka broker and the request back to the heroes and the villains service go back to the cluster. And so I can do this very fast just if I run, because I've already kind of, like any good cooking show, I've already kind of done it in the background. So I can just run this, maybe not. Am I on fights? Maybe not. Maybe that's a different thing for a different day. I thought I'd done it. Maybe I commented it out.
That's why people should come to your talk.
Yeah. Anyway, I thought it was working, but essentially it would broker and set up all the Kubernetes stuff so that I could do that.
That's pretty cool.
To be continued.
To be continued. I promised Mark Nuri that I would demo it, and I didn't. So that, at least I plugged it.
Yeah, I
It's new.
totally
It's
got.
like
I
hot
went down the
brand
Pact
new.
wormhole. I'm so excited about the Pact stuff. I can't. It's awesome.
So,
Eric,
yeah, so
do you have anything on the roadmap about the superheroes? Do you have anything?
Yeah. What's coming soon to a theater near you? So Helm charts, that's the big one that we want to do. It's like where we generate all the Kubernetes manifests today. Like OC apply, and you've got everything in like kind of one Uber YAML, or you could do it for each individual service if you want, doing the same thing but with Helm charts. So that's like kind of at the top of the list. Authentication and authorization, who cares about that? You know what I mean. We should have authentication and authorization in some of the services, and deciding what things require which roles and whatnot. Some caching with Infinispan. Would like to do Grafana and dashboards. And one thing that's been out there is like rather than requesting random fighters, be able to pick specific fighters, and that introduces a pretty interesting use case, because right now the UI only talks to the fight service. That opens up the door for bringing in like API management or an API gateway or something like that. But I don't know how to spell JavaScript, so that's really not something I can work on, unfortunately.
Oh, come on, you can do it. It's not that hard. I mean, you've been watching my brain melt, so it's probably not convincing.
I can't believe that on the top one it's not Quarkus 3 and Jakarta EE. I think that should be the next thing.
So Quarkus 3, once it gets, so what we're managing this just like any other project. When Quarkus 3 goes GA, this will get updated immediately.
Yeah.
But until it goes GA, I'm not gonna cut a separate branch, because I don't feel like maintaining multiple branches. This is just something I do on the side. So,
and that's something, if you want to be 2023, I think the superheroes should talk one way or the other to ChatGPT. If you really want to be a 2023 app, ChatGPT.
What would Magneto say when he loses
still in
this fight?
2022? So you should call the ChatGPT about
give me a villain monologue.
Yes, give me yeah.
All right, so here's remote dev. I figured out what was wrong.
Insert villain monologue here. That's great.
So now I can run Quarkus in dev mode. I set up the remote dev now. I figured I had the change set stashed, and I forgot to unstash it.
Oh man, no, Eric, that's not kidding, man. You got to have the hero villain dialogue before the fight starts. That'd be great. Oh man.
So now if I come and I ask for random fighters, I come back to my log, you can see it actually came through to my machine and it went back out. And so I'm running the fight service in dev mode.
Yeah.
And I can do the fight. So
cool stuff. I guess
So
we
with
have to
that-
wrap up. Huh?
Yeah, we gotta wrap up. I'll blame you though, because we started with no video, so you stole 5 minutes from me. I took 12 back.
It was 3 minutes actually, and we're 12 over. So
Yeah, we're 12 over. I work in exponential time here.
It's my fault. I talk too much.
it's okay.
And that's it.
All right, folks. See you
Thank
next
you.
time.
Thanks, everybody.
Right.